call Chris Farfoy.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. It's a pleasure to take a call on part one of the Environment Canterbury Governance Arrangements Bill. Mr Chair, clause 3.2b, I believe it is, sets up the mixed model arrangement for the Canterbury Regional Council, where there will be 7 elected members, up to six appointed members by the government, but still not a complete return to the democracy that we had in 2010.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Nick Smith.
It is perfectly proper for the member to want to have a debate about those governance clauses, but they are not covered in part one. The clause that he has quoted is the incorrect number, and the contribution he wishes to make should be made during the correct part debate.
Point of order, Mr Chair.
Chris Farfoy.
Can I point you to page 3, the purpose clause 3, subclause 2b, that this Act provides for a new governing body for the Regional Council comprising a mix of elected and appointed members.
I take the member's point, and it is one of a number of points covered in this first part. However, I also take the point of the Minister that has made, is that they are far more focused in a future part. So I'm not suggesting the member has contravened the rules just yet. I just bring them to his attention.
Thank you for your clarification and the Minister's Chair's comments. Well, because this Act sets up the new governing body for the Canterbury Regional Council comprising a mix of elected and appointed members, which is pointed out in part one, Mr Chair, I'd like to point to you some of the risk factors that the officials saw in the setting up of this mixed model, which helpfully, Mr Chair, are on the front page of the regulatory impact statement, which is provided for members on the table if anyone from across the way might want to look at it. The first point that the officials raised around this mixed model, which is mentioned in part one, was that public consultation was confined to a proposal for the preferred option of a mixed model governance structure rather than the range of options that are contained in the regulatory impact statement. The question that I would like to pose to the Minister and the Chair is why the narrow focus on this mixed model and not a good look at the range of options that were posed by the officials as is contained in the regulatory impact statement. So if the Minister would like to take the opportunity to talk to that point that was raised by officials around the narrow focus and almost the dumb-minded intent of just looking at one option, I would appreciate the Minister if he could take a call and explain that to us. Helpfully, the officials go on, because around the mixed model that we have here, they have concerns, because they go on to say in the regulatory impact statement that this model still limits our ability to present full community views on other options in this regulatory impact statement that were not described in the discussion document. Mr Chair, I'd like to point out the point that a number, I think Clayton Cosgrove made, was that around the Regenerate Canterbury legislation that went through this House last week, where Jerry Brownlee worked with all parties in this House to get a compromise that everyone was happy with in order to let the people of Christchurch have their voice around the rebuild of that very important city. Yet a different approach has been taken with this piece of legislation. There wasn't and there won't be an effective view around ECAN, and that's another question I want to pose to the Minister. If Minister Brownlee was quite happy to take that approach with the Regenerate Christchurch legislation, why in this legislation, under this regulatory impact statement, has a Minister not taken a similar approach? Again, the officials, when talking about the mixed model, which is pointed out in part one, they go on to have another concern, and I quote, "While based on the District Health Board model, the proposed governance model has an element of uncertainty as to its effectiveness, as it has not been used previously in a local governance context." Mr Chair, I think that shows that the officials shared some of the concerns, or many of the concerns that we have on this House, as to whether this mixed model approach will work for Christchurch. Now, when we were debating the Regenerate Christchurch legislation last week, there was unanimous feeling around this House that we had to get legislation around Christchurch right. And that's why Jerry Brownlee took that approach, and that's why I think the Minister needs to explain when there are concerns around the effectiveness of the model that he is proposing for ECAN, why he's taken this approach to take a different approach, why he's taken the approach that Minister Brownlee has said will make sure that his legislation is effective for Christchurch, but this Minister says is different. The officials helpfully go on, Mr Chair, to say that the appointment of councillors is seen by some as an unwarranted intrusion into Canterbury's affairs by central government. In English, they're saying that there is going to be no local voice for those people when it comes to this piece of legislation. Now, Mr Chair, you'd wonder, and I would hazard a guess that Mr Smith might get up and say, well, that's a bunch of lefties. Mr Chair? Mr Chair?
Maureen Pugh.
I move that the motion be now put.
I'm going to hear from Chris Farfoy.
Thank you very much. Mr Chair, just before I was interrupted by the buzzer, I was raising the point that there is a concern around some that there is unwarranted intrusion into Canterbury's affairs by central government. That was in the front page of the regulatory impact statement. In essence, that Christchurch wouldn't have a local voice. You might think that the government might say that was lefties, tree huggers who don't think they're getting listened to in Christchurch. But funny enough, it was the Law Society who submitted at the Select Committee that it was the local voice that was being taken away. So, Mr Chair, if I can take this opportunity to quote directly from the submission from the Law Society, because I think it very much succinctly encapsulates many of the concerns that we have around, on this side of the House, around the lack of democracy that is contained within this amendment bill. Their submission said, and I think this is also very much their submission that they made at the 2013 Amendment Act, where they say, underlying the reasons in the amendment bill is a concerning idea that effective leadership at a regional level at least is best achieved through a non-democratic and non-representative institution. The Law Society says this is misguided. The failure to involve citizens in regional decision-making that affects them so directly and to draw directly on their knowledge and expertise often has adverse and unexpected consequences. History has long shown the perils of non-democratic leadership, a matter that the New Zealand government has rallied against within the Pacific region. So, to have this quasi-mixed model arrangement for Canterbury, Mr Chair, has been pointed out by many bodies, as well as political parties, as not being the best fit for Christchurch. And I think in a city where we need to get the rebuild right, where we need to get some of these issues around resource allocation right, that the people of Christchurch are entitled to have their voice. And the people of Christchurch should not be fooled by the fact that the government says this is a transition back to democracy. It is still holding back the full democracy which they fully deserve. They fully deserve. They don't deserve some mixed model of, well, you can have 7 and we'll appoint 6. Their votes should have exactly the same effect as votes for the Wellington region. Well, I will get to choose the members who will be on the Greater Wellington Regional Council. So a political impasse around resource allocation is not a good enough reason to take away democracy for Canterbury. And that's what this is all about. It's not about people not getting on. It's not about taking away democracy. It's not about a rebuild. It's about this government saying, well, we can't get what we want done under the democratic votes that happened in Christchurch, under that frame, because there's an impasse. So instead of letting democracy sort that out and waiting for the next election potentially, and putting forward your case, even if our side of the equation lost that democratic argument, that's democracy. But instead of saying, let's let democracy win and put your case, they say, well, to hell with democracy. Let's get rid of the people who were elected onto this board to make sure we get the result that we want. I think New Zealanders around this country, regardless of whether they're from the Canterbury region or not, will be very concerned that this is the third time, not the first, not the second, but the third time that we're implementing this legislation to take away their local democratic voice. The government may have genuine concerns around resource allocation in Christchurch, around water rights, but changing the democratic functions of the Environment Canterbury is not the way to fix this problem. We told them that in 2010, we told them that in 2013, and now it's going to be 2019 before the people of Christchurch get to elect a full board of Environment Canterbury. And Nick Smith is to blame for that, because he says that democracy shouldn't win and that his government should win because they want to get a certain outcome. And in this House, and as has been pointed out by the Law Society, we don't want that to happen in the likes of the Pacific, but it's fine here in New Zealand. And I think the Minister should explain himself as to why he thinks it's not okay in the likes of Fiji, and we encourage democracy in Fiji, but it's not okay in Canterbury. Get up on your feet and answer that question.
You're going